Welcome to the Advent IM presentation on data protection. This presentation is designed to give an overview of the ways data protection can not only enhance your security posture, but actually behave as an effective business enabler. And now Advent IM Managing Director, Mike Gillespie.
The culture around data protection starts at the top of an organisation. The pervading view of data protection appears to be as a blocker and as an onerous and regulation-heavy exercise that does not contribute to the organisational efficacy. Sadly, this then becomes organisational culture as it drips through the management layers and infects the workforce with this rather unhelpful and inaccurate attitude. Employers are not entirely to blame if their culture dictates a sloppy attitude to data protection or security in general, and it is hard to effect change moving upward. However, good practice should not be the reserve of senior management, it should be their example. Before we dive under the data protection bonnet, I want first to consider the CIA model and look at the role it has to play in helping to effect this change in culture. CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You see, when we start to think about protecting data assets and personal information, we have to bear in mind that ultimately information assets exist for the organisation to use and exploit in support of operational capability. And so not all of the effort should go into the C part of CIA. Integrity, or the accuracy of our information, is vital. Think of keeping a marketing database up to date and making sure people who have opted out are not contacted again. And availability means that those who should have access to the information have access and have it in a timely and complete manner. For this model to work, and indeed for data protection to be successful, we must therefore put a full understanding of the nature of the information asset at the heart of our strategy. It is vital that our organisations appreciate that not all information assets are created equal. Some, like research and development data, may have a high level of confidentiality associated with them. Some, like organisational resilience plans, may have a high level of integrity, and so on. It is for this reason that we have consistently emphasised the importance of the information asset owner role, as indeed does the Information Commissioner's Office. We must also understand that there is a direct relationship, almost a law of science, between the properties of confidentiality and availability. As the requirements of one increases, so the level of the other decreases. And so the more confidential we make an asset, the less available it is likely to become. And vice versa. If we do not get the balance right between these two, then we inevitably run into the conflict between business and security, the same conflict that generates a negative culture. Only once we have fully assessed the properties of CIA for all of our information assets can we really start to leverage their potential in a safe and secure manner and make data protection and information security an integrated and business supportive process and, through this leverage, embed positive culture. The Information Commissioner's Office has the task of enforcing the Data Protection Act. Not all bodies and organisations are required to report a data breach. However, of the ones that are, we can glean important behavioural information, which helps us look at how our own vulnerabilities may exist or develop. By using this data, we can understand the kind of risks and the information that we need to be protecting and using, and understand the risk that that information may be facing, and from that, mitigate that risk. This chart tells us that the health sector is massively impacted by data breach. This is of concern to everyone and goes across the private and the public sector. One of the key things the chart shows us is that some of the sectors in which we would place the most trust and hope for good practice, in fact, are the most regularly impacted by breach. It also shows us that the occurrence of breach is ubiquitous. Data protection is often viewed as a corporate data issue or responsibility. The truth is, data requiring protection can come from many places within an organization. So, this is not a HR issue, and it is not an IT issue. It is an organizational issue. For instance, CCTV images or door entry data may also require protection. They also need to be up to date and available to those required for their role to use them. Just as earlier, different information assets could have different properties for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So each information asset can have its own risk profile, depending upon the nature of the asset and its criticality to the organization. Information can exist both physically and electronically. It can weave its way across the business silos and organizational functions, and it can acquire a different risk profile at different points in a process. So we need to protect the people, the places, the information, and the technology that encapsulates it, as well as the information that the assets themselves generate. All of this may sound like a lot of effort. However, getting it right generates significant rewards. From this understanding of risk comes an improvement in the understanding of the value of our assets, which in turn drives better culture. This culture can then be used to develop an encompassing, business supportive strategy which is supported by realistic and achievable policies, leading to an increase in compliance. It is only when all of these elements come together, working in harmony with each other, that a proportionate enforcement program can truly be introduced. Ultimately, getting this right gives us a holistic, proportionate, and risk-based approach that will effect a paradigm shift in perception and make the protection of information assets second nature. Employees can either be a first line of defense against data breach or the Achilles heel. The culture will decide which. Going back to our earlier point about the perception of good quality data protection being onerous. Hopefully by now you are starting to see this need not be the case, and in fact it can be a remarkable enabler for your business. Working in an environment where employees, including our senior management, routinely carry out best practice when it comes to data management means that valuable time is saved, as well as information being handled correctly. So, when we change our perception about data protection, when we see data protection as an enabler rather than a blocker, when we appreciate that data protection can make our employees more effective and efficient in their roles, and when we understand that when it is done well, data protection actually facilitates information sharing, both internally and with our business partners, then we can see that data protection is not simply something we must do because of legislation, but actually something we must do as an imperative to good business. The Information Commissioner's Office has identified several areas that most businesses and organisations need to improve upon in order to start making a positive impact on some of those figures we saw earlier. It is notable that very little breach that is notified to the ICO involves external hacking. In fact, some sloppy practice with printed material was a key component in many breaches. So it is important to understand these areas, as when new EU regulation starts to be adopted here in the UK, they will need to be established as general practice for all organisations. So the nature of the kind of breach that the ICO sees regularly is reflected keenly in this list of improvements required. Data retention, for example, was an issue in the Wetherspoons breach, as the data compromised in that breach was, in the words of Wetherspoons, old data. There was no reason then for them still to be holding on to it, and in fact it became a risk. What is clear from these recommendations is that in most cases, data protection compliance does not need to be driven by huge investments in technology. Indeed, the greatest impact is more likely to come from good quality policy and process driving changes in behaviour. This shows that many incidents reported to the ICO are not technical failures or the result of hacking, but are the result of poor information security practice by people. Loss or theft of paperwork at 22% is the single largest fault. Data faxed, posted, or emailed to an incorrect recipient makes up for almost a third of incidents reported. None of these behaviours would be prevented by technology, and in fact should not be expensive to mitigate or correct. Only 9% of these reported breaches come down to insecure technology, and within that sits hacking. This should put into context the insider threat. This was a threat we originally highlighted when the 2012 Ponemon Institute research highlighted that only 8% of data breaches in that reporting period came as a result of a well-resourced, well-targeted cyber attack. The rest occurred due to negligent and malicious insider activity. In the 4 years since this research was published, insider threat continues to be the most significant contributor to data breach. Investment in technology to protect against cyber attack is on the up. Investment in education and protection against the insider threat, however, is not. As we can also see from the chart, there are other failures on Principle 7 of the Act, and here you can see a reminder of what Principle 7 says. A key part of this is the word appropriate, and again we need to remind ourselves that the data needs to be available and complete to the right people when required. Data protection has never and will never be about technology alone. It is about good practice. This requires understanding, planning, and commitment. It does not necessarily mean, as we can see from the examples in this chart, to be budget-hungry tech spend. The ICO has a section on its website with extensive guidance for businesses, and the link for this is on the screen now. Hopefully you have some clarity on the actual failings in data protection. We all play a part in good practice in this area, and getting it right means staff not sending or posting data to incorrect recipients. And it also means the correct information being available to the right people at the right time and in the right format. None of this needs to cost the earth. By encouraging good practice, we can manage data protection risk in a cost-effective, proportionate, and business-supportive manner, reducing wasteful spend and enabling operational imperatives. I'd like to finish by saying a little bit about the Act itself. I often hear people say, "Oh, the Data Protection Act is too difficult to understand." So, here it is, Data Protection Act 1998 in a nutshell. Collect data for a known reason. Use it only for that reason. Keep it accurate, safe, and secure while you are using it. Dispose of it securely when you are finished with it, and do not keep holding on to it just in case. And finally, don't send it to other countries if they don't subscribe to data protection law. Follow these simple tips and you won't go far wrong.
We hope you found this presentation useful. For more information on Advent IM services and further content, please visit advent-im.co.uk or call us on 0121 559 6699.